tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up in East Side Houston, born and raised in Houston, Texas. Come from a family of Mexicanos. I was born here in Houston, so this is where I have lived all my life.
Okay.
And I'm a small business owner here in the Houston area. I own a company named Monarch Marketing and Planning, and now an organization for an anti-bullying. And also we deal with a lot of domestic violence, but I also own an organization now for called Tossum Foundation,
Wow.
empowering youth, young females and males.
Wow, okay. Does bullying and domestic violence hold something dear to your heart?
They do. They actually do, because I think that one thing goes with the other. It's very important to understand that a child that bullies comes usually from a background of domestic violence. There's something going on in the home that makes him react in a negative way, which was the situation in my case. When my son was being bullied at school, he was accepting it because that's what he was seeing at home when we were growing up. As you and I have talked before, I have a background of domestic violence. I was married for 6 years to a very, very extreme situation of domestic violence. So I divorced 6 years ago, thank God, but I was in that situation for a long time.
Okay. Why did it take you 6 years to finally leave?
I think I was scared. I think like every woman, there's fear in being able to just walk out of the situation, to being able to say, I'm going to walk away, because they create a fear. They create a fear for you to be able to go out and do it on your own. Even though I was doing things on my own without him knowing, there was still that fear of leaving and saying, what am I going to do with my children? At that point, my son, who was the only one that was born, and then my daughter came in later, but it was a fear of not knowing what to do, fear of the unknown, a fear of being able to step out of that, lack of a better word, a comfort zone, of knowing that you have a roof, but not knowing where you're going to go. So that would say that would be the main reason why I didn't leave. Even then, while I was with him, I was still sneaking out of the house, because he would lock me inside of the house. He would lock me inside the house, inside an apartment with a deadbolt. So I wasn't allowed to leave unless he let me out. And one day the maintenance man came into the house, into the apartment, to change a ceiling fan, and he found me there.
Wow.
Through that, we became friends. He didn't even know I lived there. He didn't know that there was anybody other than my ex-husband in the home. He became a friend, and we developed a friendship. And what he would do was, for his lunch hour, he would take 30 minutes in the morning, drive me to college, and then take the 30 minutes in the afternoon, drive me back home before my ex-husband would get home, lock me back up in the home, and put my books in his storage room. So my ex-husband never knew that I was going to school. I finished my bachelor's that way. He didn't know I was going to school. He didn't know I was doing anything. But it was a tough situation. It was very tough, sneaking around, hiding. And again, the fear came in of not knowing what would happen if he did catch me.
Was your abuse more emotional or physical, or?
Physical. There was a lot of alcohol abuse. There was a lot of drug abuse, and a lot of gambling. So he'd get drunk, he'd get drugged, he'd lose when he was gambling, and he would come home, and I was his punching bag. So there was never a safe environment within the home for the same reason, because he created that environment of fear, we knew that if he lost, it was over. It was a situation where it wasn't going to be able to, we were going to deal with it for the rest of the weekend, or when he was home. It was actually women get upset when their men don't come home. I was happy when he didn't come home, because we knew that it wasn't going to be an easy situation.
Right. What motivated you to want to go to school instead of just...
At the end of the day, I think I realized that wasn't an environment that I was going to stay in or put up with my whole life. So it was very difficult for me to accept it, even though I was accepting it. Even though I didn't know how to walk away from it, I knew that it was something that eventually I wanted to be able to succeed on my own and do it, even though I didn't know when I was going to do it. So it motivated me to say that I need this, even though it was a piece of paper at the time, and I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to pursue a real job, a real career. I knew that at the end of the day that was an option for me, and I wanted and I also think that at the same time I saw that as an outlet, because I was being locked up, that when this offer was put on the table, it was an outlet to say, okay, let's actually socialize with the real world, which I really didn't have that option other than when I went to school during the day.
Wow, that's amazing.
So
What would you tell women, or just people in general, that say, why didn't she just leave? Or why, she's such a smart woman.
It's easy to say just leave, but again, the fear walks in. You hear these horror stories on TV.
Mm-hmm.
You hear the stories of somebody shot somebody, the woman, or stabbed them out of anger, out of fear, out of retaliation or jealousy. That you create a scenario in your brain to say that can happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to stay here where I'm at. I'd rather deal with this than it possibly going to another extreme, which I knew that he was capable of doing. I knew he had it in him to really go that extra mile because I had seen his anger rages. And it's easy to say just leave, but it's not that easy. It really takes gut to walk away. I walked away when my daughter was born. She was 2 months old when I finally said, I can't deal with this anymore, and I didn't want her to grow up in that environment. It was very difficult for me to say, this is what I want her. I didn't want her to think that that was the situation that she had to put up with, mm-hmm. and I didn't want my son to think that that was the type of man he needed to be to keep a woman around. Mm-hmm. So when I left, I went to a shelter with nothing in my pocket except my 2 kids, and I think honestly that's when I felt the richest, because I felt that freedom of, telling my son, you can be whoever you want to be. Don't follow in those footsteps. And, as women, sometimes we make the mistake of sticking around because we want our kids to grow up with both parents, mm-hmm. without realizing that instead of helping them, we're damaging them. Because they're the ones that are seeing and perceiving everything. They're the ones that are, without us knowing, they're the ones that are listening to what's going on, watching the situation, and making it acceptable in their mind because they think that that's what life is, and it shouldn't be that way. When I left, my son that same night, he said, I love you for leaving, which I honestly thought that
wow.
It was going to be a tough situation for him. He actually became a different person. He felt free as well because he didn't have to live in fear. And my daughter, who was 2 months at the time, I knew that it was going to be a whole new circus for her of living and growing up in a different environment. Because of it, my son had to grow up very young. He's seen a lot that he shouldn't have seen. Mm-hmm. He understands a lot that he shouldn't understand. But at the end of the day, I take responsibility because I should have left before then. I should have walked away. So I feel like it was more my responsibility of anything that's happened, mm-hmm. to just say, we can do it. And it can be done. It's fear. It's scary. Especially when you have your 2 kids and you go to a shelter when you're used to having everything. But it was the most rewarding situation, the most rewarding thing that I've ever done, not just for myself, but for my children. Because it's not easy. And it's very scary at the time. But once you walk out of it, you can actually say, I did this. Now, I earned my bachelor's later on. Mm-hmm. My bachelor's in 2008. And my master's in 2008, my bachelor's in 2004. My bachelor's, I earned it when I was still with them. I didn't get to walk. I didn't get to do anything. But to me, it was more important to actually just finish. Mm-hmm. I went off and I finished my master's, and now I'm a business owner. So it can be done. Anybody can do it. It's just a matter of putting it in yourself to say it can be done.
If your daughter ever dates a guy like your husband, what advice would you give her?
Well, I'm hoping that I'm bringing her up well enough for her to know that that's not acceptable. She knows what's happened. Mm-hmm. She knows why I left her father. Mm-hmm. I have been very open with them. A mistake that we make as mothers is we try to shelter them. Mm-hmm. And this is something that it took me a while to understand. We try to shelter them from reality. We try to shelter them to protect them. Mm-hmm. It's not good. We need to let them understand what's real, what's out there, so they don't go off and make the same mistake, or they don't go off and make it acceptable in their mind.
Okay. If you had to say anything to your ex-husband or to men out there that have similar characteristics, what would you say to him?
As far as my ex-husband, he's come a long way. He really has. He's gotten the help. So I've seen the change in him. And I would, and the change has to come from us as women so they can make that change. Because we make it acceptable to them, and we make it okay because we don't speak up. It took me speaking up for him to actually realize this isn't right. So unless we as women speak up and say there's something wrong and we need to walk away from the situation, they'll never do it. And We need to take responsibility, and men need to take responsibility and understand that this isn't acceptable. But we gotta also understand that a lot of the time men are also victims. They come from a background of violence.
Mm-hmm.
They come from a background where that's what they saw. So we need to get to the bottom of it and get them the help that they need.
So for women that don't have the confidence that you have or the motivation and they just feel stuck, what advice would you give them?
I didn't always have the power, or I didn't always have this motivation. It came from within. To just one day say, the day before I was fearing for my life. And the next day I said, okay, I'm done. So it doesn't have to say, oh, I have it. Because I don't think any woman has it when they're putting up. Because if we had it, we wouldn't have put up with it to begin with.
Right.
We wouldn't have dealt with it, and we did. So I don't think any woman actually has the power to say, okay, let's do it, let's go ahead. It just has to come from within, and you have to have a reason. Whether it's for your life, your children's life. To me, my motivation was my daughter. My daughter was 2 months old when I said, I'm done. It was a matter of saying, I'm putting my son through this, which wasn't good. Which I was making it okay in his mind to put up with this, to do this. Then my daughter came as a female. I think it's really hit me to say, wow, is this what I want my daughter to grow up and do? And understand that this is okay. It's not what I want. So it's just you have to find that motivation from within to say, I'm ready to walk out and not be afraid to go to the unknown, because I think that's the number one problem that women have is they're afraid to go to the unknown. That was my problem. Because I wasn't allowing my family to know what was going on. I was keeping it to myself. I wasn't talking to anybody. So where was I going to go? Who was I going to talk to?
Exactly.
How was I going to survive? I didn't have any money. I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything to me. What was I going to do? And I think that's the main fear. A lot of women say, I don't have anybody to go to.
Do you think that the shelter, if the shelter hadn't been there, do you think that you would be where you are?
No. And the reason I say that is because through the shelter that I went, they were awesome. They helped me in every way. They helped me with counseling. They helped me with my children. They helped me. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a shelter that you go to. When you leave and if you fear for your life, just go to a safe environment. Whether it's a relative, if you have somebody to go to. Whether it's a family member, a relative, a friend, just somewhere where it's safe. I think the feeling safety is going to be the most important situation at first, because that's going to be all that you have. You don't have anything else.
What was something that was, when you were telling your story to people, what was something that you feared that they would tell you as far as judging or maybe?
The 2 or 3 people that I told, and because I come from a family of Mexicanos who will say, you get married for the rest of your life, through good and bad, through thick and thin. It was that, oh, it's going to pass. Va a pasar. It's going to be okay. You're just going through a spell. Well, 6 years later, we're still going through that spell, So it's not easy. It's I think that's a lot of things that women fear of saying, I have nowhere to go, nobody to talk to. And I've told this person, but they told me that I should stick around, that it's going to pass. Or that all men do the same. No, it's not okay. It should never be okay to put up with domestic violence. It should never be okay. Whether it's emotional, physical, any type, it's not okay.
But some people say that women provoked men. What do you say to that?
I think it's bull. I don't think women provoke men at all. I think we're strong-minded, which we should be. We should have our way of speaking up within a safe environment. And if it's not him, it will be somebody else. But nobody should have to put up with it. It's very important for the woman to understand that they are valued, that they have value, and they are not part of the man. Right. They are their own person. I told that story to somebody. They said, well, the woman was made off the rib of the man. They went back to the Bible story.
Yeah.
I said, well, yeah, they created the man first because they saved the best for last. So you have to really look at it that way and say, we're something, we're worth a lot. We don't have to put up with this. We don't have to deal with the situation.
Okay, and lastly, are there any red flags that you can kind of tell people to look out for? Or not ignore your gut feeling when you see certain characteristics?
As far as when you're dating a man? You can pick up a lot when you're dating a man. I think now I can. I think that's probably why I'm still single 6.5 years after I left my ex-husband. I'm not closed to being remarried one day, but I think that has a lot to do with it right now. It's just, now I see that if they're short-tempered, to me that's a red flag. If they yell, if they, drink a lot and they get moody, that's a bad sign. If you see that they're gambling, is seeing if they can control themselves. It's more importantly seeing how well they can control themselves, because if they can't control themselves, and if you're around, they can't control you, and they blow it up.
Yeah,
So.
very true. Well, thank you, Angie. I appreciate it. Did you want to have any last words to say?
Women have power.